I never thought I'd have to fight another kind of battle after leaving the army, but life has a funny way of testing your strength when you least expect it. It all started one calm Saturday morning when I decided to finally install a wheelchair ramp outside my house. My right leg had never fully recovered after the accident overseas, and stairs were becoming more painful each day. I had saved up for months to make my home more accessible. The ramp wasn't just metal and screws, it was freedom. As I watched the workers unload the materials from the truck, the sun hit the silver rails, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a little hope. That's when I saw her Karen marching toward me like she owned the entire neighborhood. She was wearing a bright pink tracksuit, holding her coffee cup like it was a badge of authority. Her lips were pursed so tight it looked like she'd been sucking on a lemon all morning. "Excuse me," she called out sharply, her voice slicing through the calm like a whistle in boot camp. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" I turned, keeping my voice calm. "Just installing a wheelchair ramp, ma'am." Her eyes widened like I'd just confessed to building a fortress. "You can't do that. This is against HOA regulations," she snapped, pulling out her phone. The workers froze, glancing nervously at me. I felt a familiar heat rise in my chest, not anger yet, just a slow burn of disbelief. I asked her politely, "And what regulation says I can't make my own home accessible?" She scoffed, scrolling through her phone as if looking for proof. Section 12, Paragraph 3, all exterior modifications must be approved by the HOA, and ramps, she said with a sneer, ruined the aesthetic of the neighborhood. The way she said aesthetic made my stomach twist. I took a deep breath, feeling the old soldier in me wanting to stand tall and hold my ground. "This ramp is a necessity," I replied. "It's not a decorative choice, it's my right." But she wasn't listening. Karen never listened. She turned to the workers and said, "If you keep working, I'll call the HOA president and have you all fined." The men looked at me, uncertain. I could see the worry in their eyes. I told them to keep working, but they hesitated. Karen crossed her arms triumphantly, like she'd already won. I could almost hear the faint clinking of the medals on my shelf behind me, symbols of battles fought in the name of freedom and dignity. Yet here I was, fighting for the right to enter my own house. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my tone steady, "I served 20 years defending this country. I'm not going to stand here and let you stop me from living freely in my own home." She tilted her head, unimpressed. "Oh, please," she said mockingly. "Everyone says they're a veteran these days. I'll believe it when I see proof." That cut deep. My hand clenched involuntarily, not in violence, but in pain. The air grew tense. A couple of neighbors started peeking out from behind their curtains. One of them, Mrs. Lopez from across the street, came out slowly, wiping her hands on a towel. "Everything okay here?" she asked cautiously. Karen turned, plastering on a fake smile. "Just enforcing community standards," she said sweetly before glaring back at me. I noticed her grip tighten around her phone, ready to dial at the slightest provocation. My pulse quickened. I didn't want a scene, but it was already too late. Karen loved an audience, and she was about to put on a show. "I'm calling the HOA," she declared. "You'll regret trying to sneak something like this past us." The sound of her high-pitched voice echoed through the cul-de-sac as she began dialing. I could feel the judgmental eyes of neighbors watching from windows, whispering, forming opinions without knowing the truth. My jaw tightened as I stared at the half-built ramp. Each piece of metal seemed to mock the situation. Freedom, half-finished, hanging in limbo because of one woman's ego. The workers began gathering their tools, whispering among themselves. I tried to reassure them, but even they could sense the storm that was coming. I watched Karen pace up and down the sidewalk like a guard dog, waiting for her backup to arrive. My quiet Saturday morning had turned into another battlefield, and this time the enemy wasn't carrying a weapon. She was holding a clipboard and a sense of entitlement the size of Texas. The HOA president showed up about an hour later, a tall man named Mr. Grant with silver hair, a pressed shirt, and a reputation for siding with whoever complained the loudest. Karen stood beside him with her arms crossed, her lips curled in smug satisfaction. "There he is," she said, pointing at me like she'd just caught a criminal, building without authorization. "I told you he'd try to sneak something in, Mr." Grant nodded slowly, adjusting his glasses as he looked at the half-built ramp. "Is this true?" he asked me in a tone that was more accusation than inquiry. I took a step forward, my voice calm but firm. "I'm a disabled veteran, sir. This ramp is necessary for me to safely enter and exit my home." Karen interrupted before he could even reply. That's not the point, she said sharply. Rules are rules. If we start letting people install whatever they want, this neighborhood will look like a scrapyard. I felt a lump in my throat, not from fear, but from sheer disbelief. The man I was speaking to should have understood, but I could already see it in his eyes. He was more concerned with the HOA image than with doing what was right. Mr. Grant, I said slowly, choosing my words carefully, the Americans with Disabilities Act protects my right to accessibility. If you deny this, you're not just breaking HOA rules, you're breaking federal law. That made him hesitate. Karen, however, was undeterred. Oh, don't bring the government into this, she said dismissively. This is a private neighborhood. We have our own regulations. I couldn't help but let out a short, humorless laugh. You might want to check your facts before you talk, ma'am, I said evenly. Her face flushed red, but she didn't back down. You think you can intimidate me with your army stories, she snapped. This isn't the battlefield. My voice lowered to a quiet, steady tone, the kind that made even her take a step back. No, I said, it's worse, because on the battlefield at least people had honor. For a moment, silence hung in the air. The wind rustled through the trees, and a few more neighbors had gathered around to watch. Some whispered, others just shook their heads. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Mr. Grant cleared his throat. Let's all calm down, he said, raising his hands. We can review the documents and see what the board decides. Karen smirked, clearly confident she'd won. Good, she said, because I'm filing a formal complaint. She turned to me and added, I hope you like stairs, because that ramp's not staying. My jaw clenched as I stared at her, my patience thinning by the second. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house sounded louder, every thought sharper. I sat at my kitchen table, my military discharge papers and VA disability forms spread out in front of me. My service medals glimmered faintly in the dim light. I had fought harder battles than this, but somehow this one felt heavier. Maybe because it wasn't just about me, it was about dignity, about being seen and respected for what I had given. I drafted a letter to the HOA, citing every federal protection I could find. The next morning, I printed copies and delivered them to Mr. Grant's office. By the time I returned home, Karen was waiting on her porch, arms crossed as usual, still trying. She called out mockingly, You really don't know when to quit. I ignored her, walking up to the ramp frame still standing half-built in the yard. The workers had stopped coming until the issue was resolved. Each time I looked at it, I felt a sting in my chest, like watching my independence sitting there unfinished. Karen's voice broke the silence again. You should have followed the rules like everyone else. Maybe then people would actually respect you. I turned to her slowly, my eyes cold. Respect, I said quietly, is earned, not demanded. She scoffed and went back inside, slamming her door. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. The law was on my side, and soon she was going to find out exactly what that meant. 3 days later, a letter arrived in my mailbox from the HOA. I tore it open and scanned the first few lines. Your request for accessibility modification has been denied. My hand tightened around the paper, and for a second, I thought I might crush it. Then I noticed something else, a line at the bottom in smaller print. Any continued construction will result in fines or potential legal action. That was it. I'd had enough. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer, a fellow veteran who'd helped other soldiers fight similar cases. When I explained the situation, he didn't even hesitate. They don't have a leg to stand on, he said confidently. The ADA supersedes HOA rules. I'll handle this. 2 days later, he sent an official letter to the HOA board, citing federal law and threatening legal consequences if they continued to block the construction. I handed copies to a few of the neighbors who had begun to whisper that maybe Karen had gone too far. Some even came over to show support. Mrs. Lopez brought me cookies and said quietly, You did the right thing, don't let her bully you. I smiled for the first time in days. Still, part of me dreaded what would happen when Karen found out. I didn't have to wait long. That afternoon, I saw her stomping toward my driveway, phone in hand, yelling before she even reached me. You really think you can sue us? She shouted. You think you can scare me? I kept my voice calm. I'm not trying to scare anyone, I said. I'm just standing up for my rights. She laughed, that shrill, condescending laugh that made my skin crawl. Oh, please, you think the government cares about your little ramp? Before I could answer, a black SUV pulled up to the curb. A man in a suit stepped out and introduced himself as a representative from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. He held up his ID and said, We received a complaint regarding a potential HOA violation in this neighborhood. Karen's expression froze. I could almost hear the air leave her lungs. The man asked a few questions, took some photos, and requested the HOA documents. When he read the denial letter, his expression hardened. "This," he said firmly, "is illegal. You cannot deny accessibility modifications to a disabled resident." Karen stammered, trying to explain, but the official didn't even look at her. "You'll need to remove any fines or threats immediately," he continued, "and you will issue a written apology." Mr. Grant appeared moments later, pale and sweating, apologizing profusely. Karen stood there, speechless, as the reality of her actions sank in. I just watched silently, my heart pounding with quiet relief. For the first time in weeks, I felt justice. That evening, the ramp was completed. As I rolled down it for the first time, the cool evening breeze brushed against my face. The metal under my hands felt solid strong, like freedom forged into steel. A few neighbors clapped softly from their yards. Karen's blinds were shut tight, but I could feel her watching. I didn't need her approval anymore. I had something better: my independence, restored by the very law I once defended.